The morning Dorothea Kimani put on her good navy dress was the same morning two men with hotel lanyards and too much certainty decided, on the evidence of a single glance, that she had walked into the wrong building. She did not know that yet. She was still at home in Scarborough, still pressing the collar of that dress the way her mother had shown her back in Nairobi. Careful strokes, the iron held just long enough, the fabric giving a soft hiss against the heat. She was 67 years old. Her hair was silver at the temples, and pulled back neatly, beneath a tortoise-shell clip her daughter had brought her from a conference in Vancouver 3 years ago. She wore small pearl earrings and sensible shoes, and carried a good leather handbag she had owned for 11 years, because she had always believed in buying things made to last. Her name was known on 3 streets in her neighborhood. The women at St. Andrew's Community Church knew it, because Dorothea had coordinated their winter coat drive every November for 14 years without once asking for recognition. The children at the after-school program on Brimley Road knew it because she had spent 6 years teaching them to sew, not as a job, but because she believed that knowing how to make something with your hands gave a person a different kind of confidence than the world could easily take away. The elderly residents in the apartment building beside the ravine knew it because she came by on Wednesday afternoons with container food and stayed long enough to actually sit down, drink tea, and listen. She did not do these things because she expected anything in return. She did them because her own mother had done them, and because the neighborhood had held her up during the years when she had nothing else to stand on. She had come to Canada at 24 with her husband Emmanuel and a single suitcase between them. They lived first in a basement apartment on Danforth that smelled of old carpet and radiator heat, then in a narrow row house in Scarborough, where they raised 3 children on Emmanuel's factory wages and whatever Dorothea could earn from taking in alterations and hemming wedding dresses in the spare bedroom. Those years had not been easy, but they had not broken her either. They had simply shaped her the way cold seasons shape certain trees, slower growing, deeper rooted, harder to move once settled. Emmanuel had been gone for 9 years now, taken by a stroke that arrived without warning on a Sunday morning while he was reading the paper at the kitchen table. Dorothea had sat with him for 4 hours before the ambulance came, her hand over his, talking to him as though he could still hear her, because she refused to believe otherwise until she had no other choice. She still kept his reading glasses on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. She still made 2 cups of coffee every morning before she remembered. She locked her front door at noon and made her way to the bus stop at the corner. The October sky was the particular shade of gray that Toronto wore like a second coat between September and November, heavy and close and smelling faintly of wet leaves. She did not mind it. She had learned to carry warmth inside her, rather than depending on the weather to supply it. She was meeting her oldest friend, Berta, for afternoon tea at the Westbury Grand downtown. It was Berta's 72nd birthday, and she had booked the reservation herself 2 weeks earlier, insisting over the phone that they deserved something lovely for once. Dorothea had protested mildly. She was not a woman who spent money on afternoon tea in grand hotels, and then agreed, because Berta had been her friend since the early years when neither of them had much and they had made do with instant coffee and borrowed dignity, and if Berta wanted hotel tea at 72, Dorothea would be there in her good navy dress. She arrived at the Westbury Grand at 1:10 stepping through the revolving glass door into a lobby that exhaled warm air and the scent of fresh-cut flowers. The ceiling was cathedral high, hung with a chandelier that caught the gray afternoon light from the tall windows and scattered it in pale fragments across the marble floor. Uniformed staff moved with the practiced efficiency of a place that understood its own importance and expected you to understand it too. A pianist played softly at the far end of the room. The tea lounge was visible on the far left. White tablecloths, the gleam of silver on tiered stands, the murmur of quiet conversation. Dorothea began walking toward it. She had taken perhaps 12 steps when the man in the blazer appeared. He was 33 years old, broad-shouldered, with a lanyard that identified him as Holden, assistant manager, guest experience. He had been watching her from the moment she came through the door. He did not examine the instinct. He simply acted on it the way men like him often did, translating unease into authority and calling it procedure. "Excuse me," he said, stepping into her path with a smile designed to look helpful but built to function as a wall. "Can I help you find something?" Dorothea stopped and looked at him with the patient clarity of a woman who had recognized this particular question before, in other buildings, in other decades, delivered by other men with the same careful tone. "I'm meeting a friend for tea," she said. "She's already at the table." The smile did not change, but something behind it did. "The afternoon tea requires a reservation. Do you have one?" "My friend made the reservation, Berta Ogunlai. I can give you the name." "I'll need to verify that." He did not move to verify anything. Instead, he glanced sideways at the younger man who had materialized to his left. An earpiece, a lanyard, the practiced watchfulness of someone who had been told to look alert, without having been told precisely what he was supposed to be alert about. Together the two of them had the quality of a door closing slowly. Dorothea offered the name again, clearly and without impatience. Holden made a show of consulting a tablet, scrolling with a theatricality that suggested he had already decided the answer before looking. "I don't see that reservation," he said. "Then perhaps you might try the time slot." 1 o'clock, Dorothea said, her voice still unhurried. "Or call the lounge directly and ask whether a woman named Berta is waiting for her friend." "Ma'am." He said the word, the way some people use a door, to stop movement rather than to welcome. "I'm going to need you to step aside while we sort this out. We've had some incidents recently." He did not say what kind of incidents. He did not need to. The word was doing exactly the work it was meant to do. Dorothea stood very still. Around them, other guests moved through the lobby without interruption. A couple in resort wear pulling rolling luggage. A businessman with his phone pressed to his ear. 2 young women laughing near the elevator bank. None of them had been stopped. None of them had been asked to verify anything. "I am a guest here," Dorothea said quietly. "My friend has a reservation. I have done nothing to warrant being stopped, and I would like to proceed to the table." Holden's smile was entirely gone now. He exchanged a look with the younger man and said something too low for the nearby guests to catch. And then the younger man stepped forward and reached for Dorothea's handbag. Not requesting, not explaining, simply closing his hand around the strap at her shoulder, as though her property had ceased to belong to her the moment she became an inconvenience. She pulled back instinctively. He did not let go. The sudden resistance pulled her off balance. She was 67. Her knees were not what they once were, and the marble floor offered no forgiveness, and she stumbled sideways and went down hard against the base of a decorative pillar, her handbag skidding across the floor, her right palm scraping against the stone. The lobby went silent. Not the polite quiet of a room minding its own business, but the held-breath silence of people who had just witnessed something they could not pretend they had not seen. The pianist stopped playing mid-phrase. The couple with the luggage froze. The businessman lowered his phone. A young woman near the concierge desk had her hand pressed to her mouth and her own phone raised and filming before she had consciously decided to do it. Dorothea sat on the marble floor of the Westbury Grand in her good navy dress, her palm bleeding faintly, her leather handbag lying 2 feet away. She did not cry. She breathed. One careful breath, then another. The way a woman who has survived many hard things learns to do by returning, methodically, to the simple fact of still being there. Holden stood over her with an expression that wanted desperately to resolve itself into justification, but could not quite find the right shape for it. The younger man had taken 2 small steps backward. Neither of them reached down to help her. Berta appeared from the direction of the tea lounge at a near run. 72 years old, and moving faster than either man had anticipated, her birthday dress trailing behind her, her face a portrait of fury and horror combined. She was on her knees beside Dorothea before anyone else in the lobby had moved. "Dorothea, can you stand? Are you hurt? Look at me." "I'm all right," Dorothea said. "My hand." From somewhere near the concierge desk, a voice said clearly, loudly enough for the room to hear, "That woman fell because they grabbed her bag." A second voice, from somewhere behind the pianist's bench, "I saw the whole thing. Someone needs to call the manager." The lobby, which had been holding its breath, exhaled all at once into noise. 41 minutes away on Bay Street, in the 43rd floor boardroom of Canara Technologies, the morning had been going exceptionally well. 11 people sat at the long glass table, representing 4 companies and a combined portfolio that made most rooms in the country sit up a little straighter. The agreement on the table would, when signed, reshape the digital infrastructure of 3 provincial health systems. It was the kind of deal that got written up in Canadian business and discussed at industry conferences for years afterward. The principals had spent 8 months getting to this room, and everyone in it knew it. At the head of the table sat Dorothea Kimani. She was 42 years old, with close-cropped natural hair and the composed, unhurried manner of someone who had long since stopped needing to prove anything to any room she entered. She had built Canara Technologies from a co-working space in Kensington Market at 26, with $12,000 in savings and a clarity of vision that her earliest investors had found, in equal measure, compelling and slightly alarming. The company was now valued at just over $3 billion. She sat on the boards of 2 federal digital equity commissions and had spoken at the United Nations twice. She wore no jewelry except her wedding band and a single gold stud in her left ear that had belonged to her father. Her assistant Dio appeared at the glass boardroom door at 1:52 p.m., which was itself unusual enough that Nyla registered it without looking up. Dio did not interrupt meetings. She had made that clear in his first week. The fact that he was standing at the door meant something had happened that he had calculated she needed to know immediately, and his calculations, in her experience, were almost always correct. She excused herself without elaborating, walked to the door, and took the phone he extended toward her. On the screen was a 23-second video. She watched it once. Her expression did not change in any way the people at the table behind her could have read, but her right hand, holding the phone, closed fractionally tighter around the frame. She watched it a second time. She handed the phone back to Dio, returned to the boardroom. "Open the door," said to the 11 people representing 8 months of careful negotiation. "We'll reschedule for Monday. Dio will send the new time this afternoon." She was in the elevator before anyone had finished processing what she'd said. She did not explain to the lobby security guard who wished her a good afternoon. She drove herself. She almost always did, which remained a mild source of bafflement to her security team. And she drove fast, because her mother was on a marble floor in a hotel downtown, and there was nothing on earth, not a single deal or partnership or number, with any number of zeros attached to it, that meant anything beside that fact. She arrived at the Westbury Grand at 2:17 p.m. The hotel's general manager, who had been managing the situation in the lobby for the past 20 minutes, saw her come through the revolving door and did not immediately know who she was. He knew only that a woman in a dark coat was moving through his lobby with a precision that suggested she had already decided what would happen next and simply hadn't yet told him. "Where is my mother?" Nayla said. Her voice was so quiet, so entirely without agitation, that the general manager felt the particular unease of a man who realizes he is not in the kind of trouble he prepared for. He brought her to the small room off the lobby, where Dorothea and Berta were seated, a hotel physician examining Dorothea's palm, Berta holding her other hand with the expression of a woman who had spent the last 20 minutes cataloging every consequence of what she had witnessed. Nyla came through the door and crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt beside her mother's chair. She said nothing for a moment. She simply looked at her mother's face, at the scraped palm, at the way she was holding her shoulders, at the quiet steadiness in her eyes, That was Dorothea's default response to pain, and had always, privately, broken Nyla's heart. And then she put her hand very gently against her mother's cheek. "I'm here, Mama." "I know you are," Dorothea said. She covered her daughter's hand with her own. "You always come." Nyla stayed in that position for exactly as long as it took her to be certain her mother was physically all right. Then she stood and turned and looked at Holden and the man in the earpiece and the general manager, all of whom had followed her into the room at a cautious distance. "Who decided to grab her bag?" she said, still quiet, still without the slightest elevation in her tone. The quietness was producing something in the room that no one could immediately name. Holden began to speak. Something involving procedure, a description, reasonable precautions. Nyla listened until he had finished and then said, "She came to have tea with her friend on her friend's birthday. She gave you her friend's name. You did not call the lounge. You did not verify the reservation. You grabbed her belongings, and she fell. Is that an accurate summary?" The silence that followed was the silence of a man who knows what a camera recorded and knows it does not support what he is about to say. Nyla made one call. She stepped to the side, spoke for approximately 40 seconds into her phone in a tone so neutral it was impossible to read, gave no name and no explanation. When she ended the call, she put the phone in her pocket and looked at the general manager. "My name is Nyla Kimani," she said. "I'd suggest you call your corporate office before we continue." The general manager excused himself. He was gone for 4 minutes. When he returned, his face had rearranged itself into something new. The expression of a man who has just understood the full geometry of the situation he is standing inside. In those 4 minutes he had been told several things. That Nyla Kimani was the founder and CEO of Kinara Technologies. That Kinara Technologies was the lead corporate sponsor of the National Digital Innovation Summit being held at the Westbury Grand in 11 days. The single largest event booking the hotel had managed in 3 years. That her family foundation had also funded the complete restoration of the hotel's third-floor heritage ballroom in 2019, and that her name appeared on the donor plaque beside the ballroom entrance, and that the woman with the bandaged palm, sitting in the side room with her birthday friend, was her mother. He looked, briefly and involuntarily, at the framed copy of Canadian Business magazine mounted near the entrance of the hotel's business center. The one from 8 months ago. The one with Nyla's face on the cover under the headline, "Building Something That Lasts." He had walked past it, approximately 400 times, without ever registering what he was looking at. He looked back at Nyla. She was watching him with an expression that held no triumph in it whatsoever, which somehow made it worse. The hours that followed moved with the particular swiftness of institutions that understand they are in the wrong and have very little time to begin managing it. Holden and the man in the earpiece were suspended pending investigation. The general manager delivered a personal apology to Dorothea in a voice that shook in a way that appeared, by most accounts, to be genuine. The video, filmed, shared, viewed by a significant portion of the GTA by early afternoon, reached local news desks before 6. By 8, a national outlet had picked it up. By 9, Dorothea Kimani's name had been said aloud on 3 different broadcast channels. Nyla declined every interview request. She released one statement through her communications office. 3 sentences, precise and unadorned, confirming what had happened, noting that her mother had been assessed and dismissed by strangers on the basis of a glance, and stating that Kinara Technologies would not be proceeding with the Westbury Grand as the venue for the Digital Innovation Summit. That was all she said publicly. Dorothea said considerably more. She said it 5 days later, at a gathering organized by the Neighbourhood Coalition, in the gym of the community center on Brimley Road, the same building where she had taught sewing on Tuesday evenings for 6 years. The room was full. Folding chairs in rows, fluorescent lights overhead, the faint smell of old coffee and gymnasium floor wax. And Dorothea stood at the front of it in the same good navy dress, her right hand bandaged, her posture exactly as it always was. She spoke first about her father, about watching him navigate the particular, daily work of moving through a world that had already decided to be suspicious of him before he opened his mouth, about the patience he had cultivated, not the patience of defeat, she was careful to say, but the patience of a man who understood that dignity was something you maintained on your own behalf, regardless of whether the person in front of you chose to recognize it. She described a morning when she was 11 and had asked him why he never got angry, and he had told her that anger and bitterness were close neighbors. But one of them had a better view. She had not fully understood him then. She understood him now. She spoke about what it felt like to sit on that marble floor. Not the physical part. The physical part was manageable, she said. She had fallen before. She spoke about the particular sensation of being assessed and dismissed by a stranger in less time than it takes to blink. The way that feeling was not new, had never been new, had been carried in one form or another by women who looked like her for far longer than either of those two men in that lobby had been alive. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I don't want their jobs, she said. People have told me all week that I should want more consequences. Maybe they're right. But what I know is that what happened to me in that lobby has happened to other women in other lobbies and will happen again in other buildings if no one asks the harder question. Not how do we punish those two men, but what are we teaching the next ones? She looked out at the room, let the silence settle. My daughter built something real in this country. She built it from nothing, the way her father and I built our life from nothing. And when she walks into a room, she still carries everything she walked in with before she had a company and a title and a cover of a magazine behind her. She carries it because it belongs to her, not because anyone gave it to her. She paused. That is what I want the people in those lobbies, those offices, those buildings to understand. Not because of who she is, because of who I am. Because every person who walks through those doors deserves to be treated as though their life has weight, regardless of what they're wearing or how they arrived. Her eyes found her daughter at the back of the room. Nayla was very still. There were tears on her face, not demonstrative, not the kind she permitted herself in other settings, just the quiet evidence of a feeling that had exceeded what her composure could contain. Don't decide who someone is before they've had the chance to show you, Dorothea said. That is the only thing I am asking. It is not a complicated thing. It is just the thing we keep forgetting. The room held its silence for a long moment. Then it did not hold it at all. In the weeks that followed, Dorothea sat across conference tables from the leadership of 3 hospitality and retail associations and proposed something she had been thinking about for considerably longer than the incident had given her credit for. A training program, mandatory, not optional, built around real testimonies from community members rather than procedural checklists. Sessions held not in boardrooms, but in neighborhood spaces, community centers, libraries, church halls, so that the people being trained would understand where they were sitting and what it meant to be there. Nayla helped design the framework. Kanara Technologies Community Foundation committed 3 years of funding. Nayla took no interviews about it. She let her mother be the face, because it was her mother's idea, her mother's dignity, her mother's voice, that the initiative was ultimately built to honor. They called it the Kimani Standard. Dorothea resisted the name for roughly 48 hours before accepting it with the particular grace of a woman who has spent a lifetime deflecting credit and finally decided, at 67, that some things were permitted to carry her name. On a Thursday evening in late November, 6 weeks after the morning at the Westbury Grand, Nayla sat at the kitchen table in the Scarborough row house where she had grown up. The kitchen smelled as it had always smelled, of something warm on the stove, of the particular dish soap her mother had used for 40 years, of curtains that had faded from yellow to cream, and that Dorothea refused to replace on the grounds that they were perfectly good. The radiator knocked softly against the baseboard. Outside, the first real snow of the season was falling on the street, quiet and indifferent, covering the sidewalk and the garden and the bus stop at the corner in the same unbroken white. Dorothea set 2 cups of tea on the table and sat down across from her daughter. The bandage was off her hand. The scrape had healed cleanly, leaving nothing visible. They drank without speaking for a while. It was the comfortable kind of silence, the kind that belongs only to people who have said everything important to each other across many years and no longer need to fill the space between them. "You left a deal on the table," Dorothea said eventually. "Not an accusation, not quite a question either." "We rescheduled it for Monday," Nayla said. Dorothea looked at her. "How did Monday go?" "We signed." Dorothea nodded slowly, wrapping both hands around her cup. "Good," she said. "That's good." Outside, the snow continued to fall. A neighbor's porch light came on a few houses down, casting a warm square across the white lawn. Somewhere further along the street, a car eased slowly past, its headlights sweeping briefly through the kitchen window before moving on. Nyla looked at her mother across the small table, at the silver in her hair and the steadiness in her eyes and the 11-year-old handbag hanging on the back of her chair, and thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that the most difficult and most important thing her mother had ever taught her had nothing at all to do with business. It was that dignity was not something granted to you by the room you walked into. It was something you carried, and the people who tried to take it from you never quite understood that it had never been theirs to take. Dorothea caught her daughter looking and raised one eyebrow. The expression that had meant, across 42 years, "I know exactly what you're thinking, and so do I." Nayla smiled. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and unhurried, over the whole length of the street.